She thought she was putting a pompous millionaire in his place. He thought she was unlike anyone he'd ever met. His mother thought she'd just found her future daughter-in-law. When fiery journalist Lilian Rivera mistakes Jamal Cole, a guarded, maddeningly charming tech mogul, for a rude customer, sparks fly in the most public way possible. But a single confrontation turns into a web of chance meetings, deliberate schemes, and unexpected attraction, all orchestrated by one determined mother who refuses to leave love to chance. The hum of conversation filled the chic glass-walled restaurant, blending with the soft notes of live jazz from the corner stage. Lilian Rivera sat at a small table near the back, laptop open, her fingers flying over the keyboard as she polished the first few paragraphs of her lifestyle column. The place was new, one of those trendy urban spots where the lighting was soft enough to make everyone look a little better and the prices were just high enough to weed out the casual crowd. She was supposed to be writing about the resurgence of classic comfort food and fine dining, but her attention kept drifting to the tables around her. Lilian had a weakness for people watching, and in a place like this, there was always something to watch. Her eyes landed on a tall man near the center of the room, his crisp charcoal suit clinging perfectly to broad shoulders. The way he leaned slightly toward the waiter suggested the kind of self-assurance that came with both money and power. Lilian wasn't sure why she was watching him, until she caught what she thought was the tone of his voice. It was sharp, condescending. The waiter, a young man who couldn't have been more than 19, stood awkwardly clutching his notepad. Lilian heard something about getting it right next time, and I don't have all day, and her stomach tightened. She hated that tone, the one that implied someone's time and dignity were less valuable simply because of the job they did. Without thinking, Lilian shoved her chair back, nearly toppling it in her rush to stand. The jazz music, the polite chatter, it all faded into a faint buzz as her focus zeroed in on the man. Her heels clicked against the polished floor as she strode toward him, heart pounding. "Excuse me," she said sharply, planting herself between him and the waiter. The man blinked, caught mid-sentence. Up close, he was even more striking, dark eyes that assessed her in an instant, a faint stubble shadowing his jaw. But Lilian didn't give herself time to notice more. "I don't know what kind of day you're having," she continued, "but talking to someone like that, someone who's clearly trying their best, isn't just rude, it's pathetic. Do you think being able to afford a meal here gives you the right to treat people like garbage?" Conversations around them began to slow. A couple at a nearby table openly stared. The waiter looked frozen, torn between gratitude and wanting to sink into the floor. The man tilted his head slightly, his gaze steady but unreadable. "I'm sorry, have we met?" His voice was calm, almost curious, with no trace of the irritation she expected. Lilian crossed her arms. "No, but I don't need to know you to recognize bad manners when I see them." Something flickered in his eyes, amusement? Disbelief? But before he could respond, a smooth, elegant voice cut in. "Jamal," the voice said, and Lilian turned to see a woman in her late 50s standing a few feet away. She wore an peach silk blouse and pearls, her hair swept into a sleek chignon. Everything about her radiated composure and quiet authority. The man, Jamal, looked toward her, the corner of his mouth twitching. "Yes, mother?" Lilian froze. "Mother?" The older woman's eyes flicked between Lilian and Jamal, and Lilian could swear she saw a glimmer of interest in them, almost like she was evaluating something. But she said nothing else, just raised an eyebrow in a way that made Jamal chuckle under his breath. It was in that moment, when Jamal looked at the waiter and said, "I was asking if he could take my order to the kitchen before the next tables, so it wouldn't get mixed up again," that Lilian realized her mistake. Her stomach dropped. Oh, Jamal repeated, his voice warm with amusement now. Lilian felt the heat creeping up her neck. "I may have misheard you." "You don't say," he murmured. The waiter gave her a small, almost shy smile before disappearing toward the kitchen. Lilian stepped back, wishing the floor would open up and swallow her whole. "Well," she said, fumbling for composure, "my mistake. I thought you were. Well, never mind." Jamal studied her for another moment, then smiled. Not smugly, but in a way that made her feel suddenly unsteady. "Apology accepted," he said. "Though I have to admit, it's not often someone storms up to me in the middle of a restaurant." That was refreshing. Lilian's pulse was still racing as she turned to walk back to her table. Out of the corner of her eye, she caught the older woman, his mother, still watching her, a faint smile curling her lips like she'd just discovered something valuable. Lilian didn't know it yet, but that look would change everything. Lilian's fingers trembled as she closed her laptop, the screen still glowing with half-finished sentences. Her appetite had vanished, replaced with a sinking awareness of just how public her little outburst had been. She could feel the curious glances trailing her from nearby tables, as if diners were still replaying the confrontation in their minds. She wanted to disappear. Sliding the laptop into her tote, she tried to convince herself to walk out without looking in Jamal's direction. But as she moved toward the door, her eyes betrayed her. He was still at his table, leaning back in his chair, watching her with a relaxed ease that made her feel both irritated and uncomfortably seen. He had one arm draped over the backrest, the other lifting a glass of water to his lips. When he caught her gaze, his mouth curved into the faintest of smirks, one that wasn't mocking so much as quietly entertained. Lilian's stomach tightened. She pushed through the revolving door and stepped into the warm city air. The sky was turning from gold to deep indigo, streetlights flickering to life. Cars hummed past, and somewhere a busker's guitar strummed a lazy tune. She inhaled deeply, trying to shake the memory of those steady, dark eyes. God, of all the people to misjudge, she'd picked someone's son to publicly scold, while his mother watched. His mother, who looked like she could freeze a person with a single arch of her eyebrow. "Perfect," Lilian muttered under her breath, pulling out her phone to distract herself. A new email notification blinked on her screen. Nothing urgent, just a reminder from her editor about the restaurant feature. She sighed. Maybe she could spin her embarrassment into an anecdote for the column, though she doubted the paper's readership wanted her personal drama woven into food reviews. Back inside, Maria Cole took a measured sip of her wine, her eyes following the slim figure retreating through the restaurant's glass doors. "That was unexpected," she murmured, glancing at her son. Jamal chuckled, setting down his glass. "You mean the part where a stranger accused me of being a spoiled tyrant?" "I mean the part where she stood her ground in front of half the restaurant," Maria replied, her tone calm but edged with intrigue. "Most people flinch when they think they've crossed you." Jamal raised an eyebrow. "And you think that's a good thing?" Maria's lips curved. "I think she's interesting." Jamal shook his head. "You've met plenty of interesting women." "Yes," Maria agreed. "But not like her. That one has spine. And she's not interested in impressing you, which makes her even more intriguing." Jamal didn't reply right away. He glanced toward the door where Lilian had vanished, a small crease forming between his brows. He wasn't sure why her words, blunt and misdirected as they'd been, lingered in his mind. Most people who misjudged him apologized profusely, tripping over themselves to smooth things over. Lilian's apology had been quick, minimal, like she refused to grovel. Maria reached for her clutch. "Who is she?" "No idea," Jamal admitted. "Well," Maria said lightly, though her eyes sharpened, "I intend to find out." Outside, Lilian had already walked 2 blocks, her heels tapping against the pavement, when she stopped at a corner bodega for a bottle of iced tea. As she waited in line, she replayed the moment in her head, the way his voice had been calm, measured, even when she'd interrupted him. The way he hadn't lashed back. It bothered her more than if he'd been defensive. She told herself it was just pride, the sting of being wrong in front of strangers. But deep down, she knew there was something else, something in the way he'd looked at her, as if he'd just been handed a puzzle worth solving. And puzzles had a way of reappearing when you least expected them. Maria Cole's penthouse looked like it belonged in the pages of an architectural magazine. Sleek lines, high glass walls overlooking the city skyline, every piece of furniture a balance of comfort and quiet wealth. But right now, she wasn't admiring the view. She was at her desk, scrolling through her iPad with the precision of a CEO reviewing quarterly reports. Only, she wasn't looking at market data. She was reading the website of the City View Gazette. Her manicured finger hovered over a photo in the lifestyle section. A shot of a young woman standing beside a food truck, not posed but caught mid-laugh. The caption beneath read, Lilian Rivera, staff writer. Got you, Maria murmured to herself. It had taken her less than 24 hours to learn Lilian's name. A short conversation with the restaurant's manager, a casual inquiry to a friend on the Gazette's board, and the pieces had fallen into place. Years of running social and charity networks had taught Maria the value of connections, and how quickly doors opened when you knew which ones to knock on. The door to her office opened. Jamal stepped in, sleeves rolled up, tie gone, the faint scent of cedar cologne trailing behind him. You're up early, he said, leaning against the doorframe. Some of us like to make good use of our mornings, Maria replied without looking up. He gave a dry smile. Planning another gala? Something like that. Jamal's eyes narrowed. You're not still thinking about the woman from last night. Maria finally looked up, her expression calm but unreadable. I think about a great many things. But yes, she did leave an impression. Mother. She didn't simper. She didn't flatter. And she clearly wasn't trying to be noticed by you. Tell me, when was the last time that happened? Jamal didn't answer. Maria set the iPad down. I'm organizing the annual Children's Health Foundation Gala next month. I've decided to invite her to cover it for the Gazette. I think it's important that our causes get the right kind of press. Jamal crossed his arms. And you think she's the right kind of press because she yelled at me? Maria's lips twitched. Because she was brave enough to stand her ground, even when she was wrong. You could use a few people in your life who tell you the truth. Jamal exhaled slowly. And if she's not interested? She'll be interested in the story. The rest, Maria said with a serene smile, is up to fate. 2 days later, Lilian was sitting at her desk at the Gazette, tapping her pen against her notepad while scrolling through the latest assignment list. Her cubicle was a cozy chaos. Post-it notes stuck at odd angles, a half-drunk coffee going cold, and a small cactus that had somehow survived her erratic watering habits. Her phone buzzed with an incoming call. The number was unfamiliar. Hello, she answered, pushing a strand of hair behind her ear. Ms. Rivera? This is Maria Cole. Lilian sat up straighter. Oh, hello. The name clicked instantly. Jamal's mother. I'm organizing a charity gala for the Children's Health Foundation next month. Maria's voice was smooth, polished, each word deliberate. We'd like the Gazette to cover the event. I specifically requested you. Lilian blinked. Me? Yes. I read your piece on last year's community arts fair. It was thoughtful, accessible, and honest. That's exactly the tone we'd like. Lilian's instinctive suspicion flared. The compliment felt genuine, but something about the request made her think of the restaurant incident. Still, she was a professional. That's very kind of you. I'd have to check with my editor, of course. I've already spoken to Mr. Peterson, Maria said lightly. He agreed it would be an excellent feature for you. The gala is in 3 weeks. I'll send you the details. Lilian hesitated, then said, All right. Thank you, Mrs. Cole. When the call ended, Lilian stared at her phone for a long moment. It was flattering, sure, but it also set off an uneasy ripple in her chest. What were the odds she'd be invited to cover an event hosted by the mother of the man she'd publicly scolded? Still, it was a high-profile assignment, and high-profile meant good exposure. She told herself she was overthinking it. But miles away, in her penthouse office, Maria Cole was smiling like a chess player who'd just moved her queen into position. The Grand Orchid Hotel shimmered that night, its glass facade catching the glow of the city lights like a jewel in the skyline. A valet opened the door for Lilian, and a warm rush of perfumed air spilled out from the lobby. She stepped inside, heels clicking on polished marble, the sound nearly drowned out by the hum of 100 conversations flowing from the ballroom. Lilian adjusted the strap of her small black clutch and exhaled slowly. She'd told herself on the ride over that this was just another assignment, a charity gala, nothing more. But now, as she approached the registration desk, she felt a tightening in her chest, the same feeling she used to get before interviewing celebrities. A hostess in a gold-trimmed blazer greeted her. "Ms. Rivera, welcome. Mrs. Cole is expecting you." Lilian forced a polite smile. "Thank you." The hostess led her toward the double doors of the ballroom, where chandeliers spilled warm light over guests in floor-length gowns and tailored tuxedos. White-gloved waiters weaved between the clusters of people carrying trays of champagne. And then she saw him. Jamal stood near the far side of the room, speaking with a man in a navy suit. The sharp lines of his tuxedo emphasized his height and the lean strength of his frame. But it wasn't his appearance that made her pause. It was the fact that he noticed her almost instantly, his eyes locking on hers through the crowd. Lilian's stomach dipped. She looked away quickly, pretending to be deeply fascinated by the ornate floral arrangement beside the entrance. "Lilian." The voice was warm, smooth, and unmistakable. She turned to see Maria Cole gliding toward her in a midnight blue gown, her hair catching the light like threads of frost. "Mrs. Cole," Lilian greeted, shaking her hand. "Thank you for the invitation." "I'm glad you came," Maria said, her gaze as sharp as it was welcoming. "I thought you'd enjoy the atmosphere. And I wanted you to meet a few people who could help with your story." She placed a hand lightly on Lilian's arm, steering her through the room with the ease of someone who had spent decades navigating high society. Lilian found herself being introduced to donors, board members, and doctors affiliated with the foundation. She took notes on her phone when she could, all the while hyper-aware of Jamal somewhere in the room. When Maria finally paused near the refreshment table, she tilted her head toward the corner. "You remember my son, of course." Lilian turned, and there he was only a few steps away. "Of course," Lilian said, keeping her voice steady. Jamal's mouth curved into a small, knowing smile. "We meet again." And no shouting this time. Her lips twitched despite herself. "Don't tempt me." He chuckled, the sound low and easy, and for a moment, the noise of the gala seemed to fade around them. Maria, with impeccable timing, excused herself to speak with another guest, leaving them alone. "So," Jamal said, slipping his hands into his pockets, "what's your angle for the article?" Lilian lifted her chin. "Highlighting the foundation's work, focusing on the impact rather than just the glitz. Unless, of course, someone gives me an irresistible scandal to write about." "I'll try to behave," he said, a hint of mischief in his tone. They moved toward the edge of the ballroom, away from the densest crowd. From here, the view of the city lights through the floor-to-ceiling windows was breathtaking, like a second, glittering world outside. For a moment, they stood in companionable silence. Then Jamal spoke again, softer this time. "You know, I've been wondering about you since that night." Lilian glanced at him. "Wondering what? What made you walk up to a stranger and tell him off in front of an audience?" Her brows lifted. "You say that like it's a bad thing." "It's not." He paused, meeting her eyes. "It's rare." Something in his voice, earnest, without a trace of teasing, sent a flicker of warmth through her chest. She looked away first, focusing on the way the city lights shimmered in the glass. Before she could respond, a waltz began to play. Jamal extended his hand. "Dance with me." Lilian hesitated. "I'm working." "Consider it research," he said. She narrowed her eyes at him, but the corner of her mouth betrayed her. She placed her hand in his, and he led her onto the dance floor. His hand was warm against her back, his movements steady and assured. They moved together easily, as though the earlier awkwardness had dissolved into something unspoken but magnetic. Around them, other couples swayed under the chandeliers, the room shimmering with candlelight and soft laughter. For a fleeting moment, Lilian forgot this was supposed to be an assignment. And in the shadows near the edge of the dance floor, Maria Cole watched with the faintest hint of triumph in her eyes. 2 days after the gala, Lilian was still replaying fragments of the night in her mind. The glow of chandeliers, the warmth of Jamal's hand at the small of her back, the way he'd looked at her as if she wasn't just another face in the crowd. She didn't like it. She wasn't supposed to notice things like that about the subjects of her work. She wasn't supposed to feel her heart skip during a dance when she had a recorder in her clutch and an editor expecting a clean, objective piece. So when his name appeared on her phone's screen the following Thursday afternoon, she told herself to let it go to voicemail. And yet she didn't. "Hello, Lilian." His tone was casual, as if they'd been friends for years. "I hear you're doing research for your article." "That's right. How thorough are you planning to be?" Her brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "I thought you might want to see the outreach centers the foundation funds. A couple are just outside the city. They'd make for a more compelling story than just the gala." Lilian hesitated. On the one hand, it was a generous offer. On the other, it sounded suspiciously like spending more time alone with him. "I can drive," he added. "You can bring your notebook and camera. Or mace, if that makes you feel better." She rolled her eyes, even though he couldn't see it. "Fine, but strictly for the story." "Of course," he said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. Saturday morning, a sleek black sedan pulled up outside her apartment. Jamal stepped out, dressed down in a fitted navy sweater and dark jeans. The casual look suited him far too well. Lilian climbed in, clutching her camera bag. "Nice car," she said. "Thank you. It was a gift to myself for surviving last year's board meetings." She smirked. "So, what exactly am I going to see today?" "Programs that matter," he said simply, pulling into traffic. They drove for nearly an hour, the city's skyline giving way to suburbs, then stretches of open land. The first outreach center was in a renovated brick building, painted in bright colors. Inside, children were gathered around tables covered in art supplies, laughing and chattering. Lilian spoke with staff, took photos, and scribbled notes. She found herself genuinely impressed, not just by the facility, but by Jamal's familiarity with it. He greeted staff by name, listened to their updates, and knelt down to speak to the kids at their level. By the time they stepped back into the car, she was caught between admiration and irritation at her own softening opinion of him. "You didn't seem too bored," he said, glancing at her as he started the engine. "I'm not heartless," she replied. "It's good work." And what?" He grinned. "I think you're starting to like me." Her laugh was sharp. "Don't push it, Cole." The second center was smaller, located in a converted corner store. It focused on tutoring and mentorship for teenagers. Lilian spoke with a 17-year-old who credited the program with keeping him on track to graduate. She felt a pang of something, hope maybe, that this kind of work existed quietly in the shadow of the city's noise. When they left, the afternoon sun had dipped low, turning the streets gold. "Hungry?" Jamal asked as he drove. "I was going to just grab something at home," she said. "There's a diner up ahead. Best pie in the county. And if you're worried about crossing any professional lines, I'll sit at a separate table," he teased. She gave him a flat look but couldn't hide a small smile. "Pie's fine." The diner was all chrome and neon, with red leather booths and a smell of frying butter that clung to the air. They slid into a booth by the window, the sky outside streaked with orange. For a while, they talked easily about travel, books, and the fact that Lilian had a mild obsession with crossword puzzles. Jamal listened more than she expected, asking questions that made her feel seen. But the easy mood shifted when the conversation touched on family. "You and your mom seem close," Lilian said. Jamal's gaze flickered, a brief shadow passing over it. "We respect each other. She's strategic. That's one word for it." "You mean the way she orchestrated us ending up at the same gala?" His mouth curved in a knowing half-smile. Lilian's fork clinked against her plate. "So you admit it was on purpose?" "I didn't say I was in on it," he replied, leaning back. "But she clearly likes you." Lilian shook her head. "Your mother's opinion isn't the deciding factor for me." His eyes held hers. "Then what is?" She felt heat rise in her cheeks, frustrated that he could unsettle her so easily. "Honesty. Integrity. Not games." Jamal's expression softened, just slightly. "Then maybe you should get to know me before deciding I'm playing one." They sat in silence for a moment, the air between them charged. When the waitress brought the check, Lilian reached for her wallet, but Jamal slid his card onto the tray before she could argue. "I'll get the next one," she said. "I'll hold you to that," he replied, and there was something in his voice that told her there would be a next one. It was a Tuesday morning when Lilian's phone started buzzing relentlessly. She was halfway through her second coffee, hair pulled into a loose knot, scrolling through notes for another story, when her friend and fellow journalist Nia called. "You've seen it, right?" Nia's voice was already thick with tension. "Seen what?" Lilian asked, frowning. "Check the Metro Star's front page online. Now." Lilian opened her laptop and typed quickly. The moment the headline appeared, her chest tightened. "Mystery woman on Jamal Cole's arm. Social climber or secret fiancé?" Below the headline was a grainy photo from the gala. Jamal and Lilian mid-dance, her head tilted slightly toward him, his hand resting at her waist. The angle made it look intimate, too intimate. Her stomach dropped. The article was worse. It painted her as an ambitious reporter using her job to get close to Jamal. Words like opportunist and gold digger were tossed around with casual cruelty. It even mentioned her rent-controlled apartment, as if that were some kind of smoking gun. By the time she finished reading, her hands were shaking. She called the Metro Star's editor, a man she'd worked with once on a joint piece, and demanded to know who had leaked it. He claimed ignorance, insisting it came from an anonymous source. By noon, 3 people at the Gazette had stopped by her desk to see how she was doing. The pity in their eyes only fueled her anger. And then her phone buzzed again. "Jamal." She debated ignoring it, but the fury in her chest demanded answers. "You," she said the moment she picked up. "Good morning to you too," Jamal said, though his tone was careful. "I'm guessing you've seen the article." "Don't play coy," Lilian snapped. "Did you leak this?" There was a pause. "You think I'd do that?" "I don't know what to think right now, Jamal. It's awfully convenient that a flattering photo of you comes out while I'm made to look like. She cut herself off, jaw tight. "This could tank my credibility." "I had nothing to do with it," he said, voice firmer now. "If I wanted people to know I like spending time with you, I'd tell them myself." "That's not what this is about," Lilian shot back. "This is about someone using me to make a story, and somehow you're at the center of it." "I'll find out who did it," he said. "Don't bother." Her voice shook, but she forced it steady. "I'm not some project for you to fix, Jamal. I don't need you to swoop in. I just need you to stay out of my way." She hung up before he could reply. That evening, Lilian walked home through the city streets, her heels clicking against the pavement in sharp bursts. The early spring air was still cool, the wind carrying the scent of rain. She shoved her hands into her coat pockets, trying to convince herself she'd done the right thing. She couldn't afford entanglements, especially not with someone who attracted attention the way Jamal did. Her work depended on being above suspicion, and now her name was smeared across gossip columns. By the time she reached her apartment building, her chest ached. She told herself it was just from the long walk. Across the city, Jamal stood in his office, staring at the same Metro Star article on his screen. His jaw was set, eyes dark with a mix of frustration and resolve. He'd already made 3 calls. One to the foundation's PR director, one to a contact at the Metro Star, and one to a private investigator he used for corporate security matters. He wasn't angry because the press had linked his name to Lilian's. He was angry because the piece had gone after her, someone who hadn't asked to be part of his world, and it had done so with venom. And if he found out who was responsible, they were going to regret it. 2 days after the article dropped, the city was caught in an unseasonably warm breeze. But for Lilian, it felt like a chill had settled in her bones. She kept her head down at work, avoiding the curious looks of coworkers. Her editor, to his credit, didn't bring it up, at least not directly, but she knew he was watching, waiting to see if the scandal would fade. At night, she buried herself in drafts, polishing her notes from the outreach center visits. Writing kept her grounded, but every now and then her thoughts strayed to Jamal, his steady gaze, the sound of his voice when he denied leaking the story. She hated that a part of her believed him. Meanwhile, Jamal's approach was anything but quiet. He sat in his office, sleeves rolled to his elbows, laptop open to a spreadsheet of contacts. The private investigator he'd hired, a former investigative journalist named Kane Rourke, sat across from him, flipping through a manila folder. "You were right," Kane said. "It wasn't anyone from your team or the Foundation's PR. The leak came from inside the Gazette." Jamal's jaw tightened. "Name?" Kane slid a page across the desk. "Sophie Hale. Freelance gossip contributor. Did a short stint at the Gazette 2 years ago. Still has friends there. And she's been trying to land an interview with you for months." Jamal scanned the page. "So she sees me with Lilian, spins it into a headline, and cashes in. That's the gist. She probably paid the photographer to hang around the gala entrance and got lucky with the timing." Jamal leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. "Then we'll clear it up. Publicly." The next morning, the Metro Star's online edition featured a new headline. "Clarification. Gala photo misrepresented. Sources admit error." The statement quoted Jamal directly. "The photograph in question shows me and journalist Lilian Rivera during a public charity event. Any insinuation that Ms. Rivera sought personal gain from our meeting is false and unfounded." It also named Sophie Hale as the original source of the tip, noting her ties to gossip reporting. Jamal didn't stop there. He called in a favor from a respected business magazine, giving an exclusive interview where he praised Lilian's professionalism and the quality of her work. When Lilian saw the retraction, her first reaction wasn't relief, it was disbelief. She sat at her kitchen table, coffee cooling in front of her, scrolling through the article. The fact that Jamal had gone out of his way to name her as a victim of false reporting, rather than brushing it off, made something in her chest twist. By the time she closed her laptop, she realized she'd been staring at the same sentence for several minutes. Any insinuation is false and unfounded. It wasn't just damage control. It was defense. That evening, Lilian found herself walking through Riverside Park, the fading sunlight painting the water in streaks of gold and violet. She told herself she was there to clear her head, but part of her knew she was working up the courage to call him. She hadn't forgiven him, not entirely, but she couldn't ignore the fact that he'd used his own platform to protect hers. And that mattered. She stopped by the railing, watching the river shimmer in the wind. A jogger passed behind her, and the sound snapped her out of her thoughts. She pulled out her phone. Her thumb hovered over his name for a long moment. Then she slid it back into her pocket. She wasn't ready yet, but she was closer than she'd been yesterday. Across town, Jamal was in his kitchen, sleeves rolled up, chopping vegetables for a late dinner. When his phone buzzed, he glanced at the screen. No new messages. He sighed, setting the knife down. She'd seen the article by now. If she still didn't want to talk, he'd wait. Maria walked in just then, letting herself into his apartment like she always did. "Well," she said, picking up the business magazine from his counter, "you've certainly made a public statement." "I told the truth," he said simply. Maria studied him, a small, knowing smile tugging at her lips. "Sometimes, Jamal, the truth is just the beginning." Lilian was halfway through editing her article on the outreach programs when her phone chimed with an unfamiliar number. "Ms. Rivera? This is Maria Cole," the voice said, warm but unmistakably authoritative. Lilian straightened instinctively. "Mrs. Cole. Hello. I wanted to thank you for the coverage your paper has given our foundation," Maria said. "We're hosting a small private dinner for key supporters and friends tomorrow evening. I'd like you to join us, not as press, but as a guest." Lilian hesitated. "That's kind of you." "But It's a thank you, Lilian," Maria cut in gently. "No agenda. I'd be disappointed if you said no." Lilian exhaled slowly. "All right, I'll come." The next evening, she found herself in front of a wrought iron gate that opened to a discreet townhouse tucked away on a quiet, tree-lined street. A doorman ushered her inside, where soft golden light spilled across polished wood floors. The dining room was intimate, set with a long oak table draped in white linen, candles flickering in crystal holders. Only a handful of guests mingled, champagne glasses in hand. Maria approached immediately, elegant in a cream silk dress. "Lilian, you look lovely." "Thank you," Lilian said, smoothing the skirt of her navy dress. Maria led her toward the far end of the room, and that's when Lilian saw him. Jamal stood near the fireplace, one hand in his pocket, the other holding a tumbler of something amber. When he turned and saw her, the smallest, almost hesitant smile touched his lips. Maria, feigning innocence, said, "I'll leave you two to catch up," and drifted away. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Jamal set his glass down and stepped closer. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said. "I wasn't sure I should," she admitted. His eyes searched hers. "But you did." Lilian folded her arms, not in defense, but to steady herself. "I saw what you did. The retraction. The interview. You didn't have to." "I did," he said simply. "Because it was wrong. And because I wanted people to know the truth about you." She swallowed, her throat tightening. "Why? You could have just let it blow over." Jamal's voice softened. "Because I respect you. And because I like you, Lilian. More than I probably should." Her heart thudded once, hard. She looked down, tracing the rim of her clutch with her thumb. "I was angry. Not just about the article. About the fact that I don't do well with people who can step into a mess and make it vanish. It makes me feel powerless." "I get that," he said. "I'm used to solving problems with resources most people don't have. But I'm not trying to take your power, Lilian. I'm trying to stand with you." She glanced up at him, the flicker of sincerity in his gaze catching her off guard. The silence between them wasn't awkward now. It was weighted, charged with all the things left unsaid since that first chaotic meeting. Finally, she took a breath. "You're still infuriating sometimes." A slow smile spread across his face. "I can live with that." They stood there for another moment, the murmur of conversation from the table filling the background. Then he reached out, brushing his fingers lightly against hers, a question without words. She didn't pull away. Maria's voice called from across the room. "Dinner's served." As they walked to the table together, Lilian felt something she hadn't in weeks, like the ground under her feet was steady again, but also lighter. Later, after the dinner plates had been cleared and the last of the guests had begun to leave, Jamal offered to walk her out. The night air was cool, scented faintly with spring blossoms from the townhouse garden. At the gate, she turned to him. "You know, I still think you're a little too used to getting your way." He leaned slightly closer, the corner of his mouth curving. "And you're still not afraid to tell me so." She smiled, shaking her head. "Guess we're even." Then, before either of them could second-guess it, she rose on her toes and kissed him. It wasn't dramatic, not like in the movies. It was warm, steady, and real, like something that had been building for a long time and had finally found its place. When they pulled back, his forehead rested lightly against hers. "So, coffee next week," he murmured. "Only if I get to pick the place," she said. "Deal." And as they stepped into the quiet street, Lilian realized she'd never been more glad to have shouted at the wrong man. We have come to the end of the story. I hope you enjoyed it. Leave a like and subscribe to my YouTube channel for more interesting stories.